All right, what's going on, guys? I am here today to talk about meniscal repairs and how that affects your ACL recovery. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Tommy Mandela. I am the owner and founder of All on ACL. We are an exclusively online digital coaching company. We work with ACLers all around the world. We've been doing this for a little over 4 years now. We've worked with hundreds of ACLers, helping them return to sport, helping them achieve their goals, and get back to what they're doing. One of the biggest issues we see with ACLers is those who've had a meniscal repair. And there seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding of how that meniscal repair and the precautions afterward affect what that recovery is going to look like. So that's what I'm going to be doing more of these lives here, but that's the first topic I really wanted to touch on because I think it's such a critically important thing and something that we've seen derail so many ACLers recovery after they've had a meniscal repair. So I wanted to go through it now. So the first thing that I want to touch on is when ACLers have a meniscal repair, the precautions. And many people are often confused because there is so much variability with those precautions. So we've seen across, depending on the region you are in, the country you are in, the type of surgeon you're working with, and then the type of repair you've had, or the area in the meniscus that you've had repaired. There are precautions ranging from no precaution, so treating it totally like a traditional ACL recovery, and then also all the way to, on the more conservative side, non-weight bearing for 6 weeks, right? I would say a majority of ACLers who have a meniscal repair have either non-weight bearing for 6 weeks or a brace locked in extension for 6 weeks. Those precautions have a significant impact on the rate at which you're going to recover and the level of atrophy you're going to go through. Now, many surgeons are very conservative on their protocols in those first 6 weeks. They say, hey, we repaired this meniscus. We want to make sure that it's going to be protected, and they will put precautions in there like that, where you're non-weight bearing for 6 weeks or brace locked in extension anytime that you are up and weight bearing and walking. We are not saying to disobey those precautions. Your surgeon was inside your knee. He did the repair. There is logic to that, particularly in the non-weight bearing. When we talk about a posterior horn of the lateral meniscus, there is some evidence to support maintaining those precautions. So obey what the precautions you're given. Where people make mistakes is many surgeons will take their traditional ACL protocol and they will slap 6 weeks of non-weight bearing or 6 weeks of brace locked and extension onto the beginning of that, and then they don't change much else. And that's where people really get into trouble. So let's start and go through this a little bit sequentially. Let's say you've had an ACL reconstruction and you are non-weight bearing for 6 weeks. The number one thing you need to understand that we see people make mistakes during in this phase is this does not mean do nothing but range of motion. It doesn't mean, hey, all you can do is limited range of motion. You're really not going to be able to make any progress during this time. You can strengthen in a non-weight bearing fashion. You should be strengthening in a non-weight bearing fashion. You will undergo a level of atrophy because the surgery shuts your quad down, and then the lack of weight bearing, the lack of ability to challenge your muscles by putting weight through them will create additional atrophy. So you're going to atrophy to some degree over those 6 weeks. However, you can do a progressive, gradual strengthening program during that time that will get your quad firing and limit that atrophy. So you should be making progress during those 6 weeks, even if it's going to be limited by being non-weight bearing. That's one thing. The other piece is brace locked and extension. You should treat almost like it's non-weight bearing. I'm not saying with walking, I'm saying in terms of the level of atrophy your quad goes through. So what exactly does that mean? What that means is that if you are non-weight bearing, if you are brace locked and extension for 6 weeks, every time you take a step, you are just relying on the external support of that brace. That is going to prevent your quad from working. The way your quad works is when you take a step and you land, you let your knee unlock and bend. Your quad is working to support that eccentric unlocking and then that squeezing to straight. Without that, you're really not using your quad. You're using the brace as kind of a peg leg. Again, I'm not saying not to do that, but it's critical to understand how that's going to affect your recovery. The biggest mistake we see people make is ditching their crutches before they get rid of that brace. So they'll keep that brace locked and extension. They'll walk on it with compensations because they're just using that locked and extension brace as kind of a peg leg. And then they'll get rid of their crutches midway through that because the crutches suck. There's no pretense about that. The crutches do suck. But then at 6 weeks, they'll be allowed to unlock their brace, and now they'll be asked to walk at their full body weight without those crutches. And what will they do? They won't have the strength to support themselves in normal walking where they let their knee unlock and they squeeze to straight. So what happens? They do one of two things. They co-contract and squeeze their muscles around that leg, and they either continue walking with a peg leg and hold that brace and extension and hold that leg in extension even without the brace, or more commonly, because the brace rarely keeps you in full extension, they keep their knee co-contracted in a little bit of flexion and they never let it unlock to use their quad. That creates issues because over time, that's when you can develop scar tissue because you never get into that full extension. Now, what we often see the mistake people make is they will really go after the range of motion and do a ton of things like massaging the back of their calf, heel propping, prone hangs or backpack hangs, but they don't address the root cause of it. So you might do all this stretching and all this loosening up to get the back of your knee calm and get your full extension, but then you go and walk, and if you don't address the walking and address the strength, you're going to lose that extension all over again, and it's going to be a fight to get it back constantly. And if that fight goes on too long, you can develop scar tissue in that bent knee position. So the two main points I want to make about those first 6 weeks are, one, you should be strengthening during those 6 weeks, even if you're non-weight bearing. There's a variety of ways to do that safely. And that is something that should be a part of your program. The problem we see is people are overly cautious during that 6 weeks. There's ways to strengthen while obeying those precautions. Number two is do not ditch your crutches before the brace. Now, this sucks. What I'm telling you sucks. And most surgeons and most PTs don't want to be the bearer of that bad news and tell you, hey, it's not just 6 weeks of non-weight bearing or 6 weeks of brace lock and extension, but you should be using the crutches for at least 2 to maybe 3 or 4 weeks after that period to help you reestablish normal walking mechanics. Now, what happens is essentially you won't have the strength to support yourself in normal walking if you've been brace locked and extension. So if you don't use those crutches, you're going to figure out a way to compensate, right? And that's what I just described with holding your knee in that bent knee position. Using crutches, not the way medically you use them to be non-weight bearing and prevent any load from going through your knee to protect the repair, more so to help you unweight your body and walk at a percentage of your body weight and help you reestablish normal walking mechanics. That's where the crutches come in and will really make a big difference because they will allow you to walk at, say, 25% of your body weight where you can land, let your knee unlock, squeeze to straight. That will allow you to gain more quad strength because you'll be using your quad instead of compensating, and it'll allow you to maintain extension better because you'll be able to get into extension rather than avoiding it because you don't have the strength. Those are the two main points I want to make about those first 6 weeks. Now, when we go from 6 to 12 weeks, this is often what I call the danger zone, right? This is where ACLers with meniscal repairs totally lose this rehab is during this 6 to 12 week period. So what happens? You've been super cautious. The surgeon was very protective of his repair, super cautious for those first 6 weeks. And now the protocol really opens up. It's like pretty much matches what a traditional ACLer's protocol looks like at 6 weeks. Now, structurally, that may be okay. However, if you don't respect functionally the atrophy you've just gone through and what 6 weeks of non-weight bearing or 6 weeks of brace lock and extension did to your recovery, it's going to make a big difference and you're going to set yourself up for failure. So what are the things we see get thrown at ACLs at this point? Number one, I just said, was getting rid of the crutches too quickly. That's the biggest red flag. If you're ditching your crutches before your brace and then you're expected to walk once that brace unlocked, you're gonna overload yourself just with day-to-day life, right? And people might start returning to work, live in a city where they're walking a lot. Managing your step count and managing the load and using crutches to unweight yourself and walk normally is critical to success in this phase. The other thing we see people get thrown at is getting, quote, too functional too quickly, right? So they don't start open chain exercises. They don't start loading on machines. They get given lunges, single leg squats, Stairmaster, elliptical, deadlifting, all of these things that are not wrong exercises, but you're most likely not ready for in this 6 to 12 week period. Sometimes we see people given some of the right things like machines and open chain exercises and a variety of quad isolating exercises, but they get given them at the same time. And if you read the protocols, they look like, hey, you can do whatever the hell you want at 6, 12 weeks, except running and jumping. And they get thrown these things at them and they're not ready for them, right? The surgery itself shuts your quad down. Sorry, the injury itself shuts your quad down. Then the surgery itself shuts your quad down. The brace locked and extension or non-weight bearing period shuts your quad down. And then on top of that, if you've had a patella tendon graft or a quad tendon graft, that's kind of a quadruple whammy to your quad. If you don't specifically rebuild that and isolate that muscle and train it to utilize it during these more functional activities, you're going to be creating compensations. And the thing many people don't realize is being able to do something doesn't mean you should be doing it. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that creating a level of compensation where a lunge exercise is something we traditionally think of as a quad dominant exercise. However, if you're young, you're fit, and you're a good athlete, and you don't have the quad strength to use your quad when you do that, you're just going to figure out a way to compensate, right? You're going to put more weight on your back leg. You're going to feel it more in your glute. You're not going to punch your knee over your toes and use your quad as much. So beware those compensations and beware getting functional too quickly. A quick and dirty test is like, did I start lunges before I started on the knee extension machine? Red flag if you're doing that. Did I start squatting, single leg squatting with weight, any kind of squatting with weight, single leg squatting before I started single leg press? Again, those are things that are easy red flags of like, this isn't being done right. There are some adjustments I should be making. We need to build you back up at a percentage of your body weight to allow you to support yourself in normal walking first at your full body weight, and then secondarily adding external weight in things like squatting and deadlifting and things like that. So that 6 to 12 week period should be more machine based, should be more isolating rather than functional and external weight. And I think that's a critical point people miss. From there, what we also see is a problem in ACL rehab is ACLers being given dynamic progressions without strength testing, right? So what does that typically look like? We're talking about plyometrics, so jumping, running, or agility ladder. Now, if you're given an agility ladder before you've gone through a run progression, that's another quick and dirty red flag. This is not being done right. If you're being told to single limb jump before you've done double limb jumping for really a period of months, that's also a red flag. There's no logic to you using an agility ladder or single limb jumping at 12 weeks. Even if you had an ACL recovery without a meniscal repair, there's really no logic to it. But if you had a meniscal repair and you've been non-weight bearing for 6 weeks, there is no way that you are ready to be doing an agility ladder or single limb jumping in any capacity or even running at 12 to 14 weeks. It's very early when you've been non-weight bearing or brace locked and extension for 6 weeks. So that's an immediate red flag. Now, we have ACLers we've worked with who were going to in-person PT, and they're like, hey, they had me go slowly through the agility ladder. We were cautiously jumping. We started some light plyometrics. Just because you're able to do that, and we called it quote unquote light, does not mean it's the right thing. You may survive it, right? It may not create swelling, pain, or loss of range of motion. Yes, but you're just simply training yourself to compensate. There is no advantage to starting those things early when you don't have the quad strength to do it. So you should be undergoing a strength test prior to doing those things. In all cases, that's critical. And then secondarily, more than likely, you may not even be ready for a strength test at 12 weeks if you've just been limited in your weight bearing for 6 weeks. So that's a critical piece, that you should really not be running, jumping, any kind of agilities at 12 weeks, and you shouldn't be starting those things without a strength test. A quick and dirty assessment for that is, do you own step downs? Do you feel like doing stairs in your day-to-day life is completely normal? If not, you shouldn't even consider jumping, running agility ladder. And again, there's no such thing as light agility ladder, easy through it. It is a waste of time. It trains compensations. It trains you to do the wrong thing. So I wouldn't be kind of fooled by that. Ditto for the Alter G. If you start on the Alter G after strength test, that's fine. For that, those are the anti-gravity treadmills. Walking in is one thing, but starting running without a strength test, because you have access to an Alter G, there's no advantage to that. You need the strength to do that normally. We've had people who've been started on the agility ladder when they didn't have full extension, when they're not even walking normally. It is a critical point that it is shocking how many people are missing that in their rehab. So those are really the things to look out for. Someone takes the agility ladder on you in the 12 to the 3 to 4 month mark, and you've had a meniscal repair, fake sick and go home for the day. Don't do it. Other things we want to say. Now, what should that kind of progression look like? So I've talked a lot about, hey, starting lunges too early, starting deadlifting too early, single limb squatting with weight. We are not anti that at all. We are very big proponents of weightlifting, of progressive overload, of lunging, deadlifting, squatting. But you need a requisite level of quad strength to get there. So if you have not isolated your quad and you have not built up a certain level of strength that you're walking normally, you're approaching day-to-day normal, you're owning your body weight and doing step downs, you should not be adding external weight with things like squatting, deadlifting, and then even things like lunges are erring toward more of a single leg type motion. What should that kind of progression look like is it should be those 6 weeks are non-weight bearing. You're focusing on getting as much strength as you can and limiting that atrophy. Then you're starting on a machine-based progression and transitioning to more function using your body weight more. Then when you're owning step downs, you're owning your body weight, you're starting to get into additional loads and more of a barbell lunge type progression. As you approach strength testing, you should be at a level before you start running. You should be at a criteria that you've known from the beginning and have been working towards. And that should look like 80% quad symmetry on strength testing. It should look like a quiet knee that doesn't swell in response to workload or have setbacks in response to your day-to-day life. So we talk about day-to-day normal. You should have full hyperextension matching the other side. And you should feel like, hey, day-to-day, I'm going up and down stairs, I have no problem. And then again, that strength testing criteria is really important. One of the biggest things we tell people, and this is kind of the sum thesis that I really want to get out, is if you have a meniscal repair and you're starting here and your goal is to get to here, back to playing soccer, back to skiing, back to playing softball, whatever it may be, playing basketball, you can get to the same place. There is no doubt about that. Do not view this meniscal repair as something that is going to affect your long-term recovery or where you're going to be at 8, 12, 15 months, right? However, if you expect to be at the same place at 8 weeks, at 12 weeks, at 16 weeks, even at 6 months, trying to rush to quote unquote catch up or to match a protocol that is very poorly done, that will prevent you from ever achieving your goals. So you can be at the same place at 8 to 12 months, but you need to take a longer route to get there. The way you will catch up is the slow progressive overload, reaching that same point at the end of this. So 1 year, you can be playing all of your sports. You can be passing hop testing, passing strength testing, totally confident in that leg and everything that you want to be. But if you rush to try and be there at 4 to 6 months, and even earlier than that, God forbid, you're setting yourself up for failure. And that's really a key question that you want to make sure you understand, that when you have the ACL repair with meniscus, it will be underplayed by the surgeon and it will be underplayed by your PT most cases. They will not explain to you the level of atrophy and the level that those 6 weeks of limited weight bearing or brace lock and extension affects your early recovery. You should know that. You should accept that. However, you can catch up, but if you rush to catch up, it's going to leave you in a different place. Those are the biggest points I wanted to make about ACLs with meniscal repairs, that again, you can get to the same place. It's just going to take a little bit more time in the early stages, and you have to understand functionally the level of atrophy you've gone through. Make sure you don't rush off the crutches. Make sure you don't get rushed to get too functional, starting lunges and single arm squats. Make sure you don't rush to start running, jumping, cutting, and pivoting without a criteria. And then finally, on the mental side, throw the protocol out the window. Listen to the early precautions, but do not treat what the protocol says you should be doing at 4 months like, oh my God, I'm behind, because you will drive yourself insane and you will feel behind every step of the way, and you will derail your recovery trying to catch up. So 100% do not expect to match your recovery to someone who's not had a meniscal repair, and don't expect, people have a little bit too much faith in the system. Unfortunately, you'd be shocked at what that protocol looks like. Is typically just slap 6 weeks non-weight bearing onto the beginning, 6 weeks brace lock and extension onto the beginning, protect that repair, and then the rest looks the same, with no respect given to how that functionally alters your recovery. You need to be working with someone who understands that. You need to understand that yourself. So A, you don't drive yourself crazy. B, you don't rush to derail things. And C, you don't create issues that then prevent you from being at the same place at 12, at a year, and even beyond that. What we tell people is you cannot win this recovery in the first half, but you can lose it by rushing to try to do too much. So I'm going to, we'll be posting this on the page. I see a couple people opt in, but I know 9:15 is kind of a tough time. So if anyone has questions, feel free to ask in the comments. But if not, I'll be posting this out. And then you're more than welcome to join and ask any question in the comments beyond this if you're seeing this late. So thanks for joining us.